Welcome back, video creeps. Since its inception in 1980, to say that the Friday the 13th franchise has become a cultural phenomenon and a cornerstone of the horror community would be a gross oversimplification. Jason out here, he's killing it. However, even with that legacy, beneath the iconic hockey mask and the cinematic thrill of every suspenseful installation of this franchise, I couldn't help but take notice of an interesting conversation that's going on within the community. And that is, of all of the horror franchises, is Friday the 13th the most chauvinistic? Are these themes even worth debating? Is there an anti-feminist element to these films? And if so, why is that the case? So do me a favor and like this video right now, because that helps, and subscribe if you're new, because this one's gonna be a doozy. Now, the idea here can stem from the main character of Jason Voorhees. I don't know why I said his whole name like that, like you don't know what Jason I'm going to be referring to. That was silly. People have made an argument that Jason is not only the representation, but the very embodiment of the franchise's overall anti-feminist agenda. Spooky stuff indeed. It goes that Jason's violent acts largely target young women, and it comes as a surprise to no one that he particularly goes after those who exhibit sexual independence and freedom. That facet is undeniable. Jason hates premarital sex, and that pattern is evident in almost every single installment of this series. If you get freaky, you will get popped. But this isn't unique to just Friday the 13th. In fact, it even has its own name within the genre. This is known as the sex equals death trope. And in and of itself, just the conversation around its mere existence largely aligns with a conservative and anti-feminist perspective that punishes women for exercising their sexual rights. It's true, those aren't my feelings, but yo, that's where that shit comes from. It's rooted in Judeo-Christian values, and it promotes sexual purity. In many religions, promiscuity, let alone getting it in, is considered no, naughty, go to hell stuff. So for some, it's seen that Jason is a conduit of sorts. You know, in a metaphorical sense, he does exhibit a focus on the preservation of chastity, purging immorality in his pursuit of these transgressors and cleansing up the camp. It's even been argued that his disfigured appearance serves as a visual reminder of the dangers and the potential negative outcomes associated with sexual promiscuity. And under that microscope, I can see where perhaps that specific trope is wholly anti-feminist and applies here. Again, under that microscope, I can see how Jason's character may stand as a metaphor for systemic patriarchy, where he's like wielding a power that mirrors societal efforts to control and suppress women. And sexuality is something that, you know, that's real shit. Like I said, I see that perspective. But before we dive headfirst into calling Jason a bigot or coining Friday the 13th as the most chauvinistic franchise in horror, is that shit even true? Like, again, I'm not saying that trope itself isn't chauvinistic, for sure, all day. But is it fair to attribute that to all of Friday the 13th? So let's look at the numbers ourselves to figure this thing out, you know, just to get it down on paper. Let's trust me, the guy who hasn't challenged himself mathematically since high school. I went to an art college. I didn't need math in like history of film or fucking analysis of form. Now, with an average of 17 kills per film, that leaves us with 177 on-screen kills, be that via hallucinations, dreams, flashbacks, what have you. 100 or 56% of them were male, and only 77 or 44% were women. That looks like pretty good numbers, until we hit a wall when comparing overall characters. Of the 303 characters that show up across the franchise, 200 of them were men, and only 50% of that 200 were actually killed, which leaves us with an ugly number for the ladies. As of the 103 females shown in the franchise, 74% of those ladies do not survive. So woof! Pretty fucking sobering numbers when you look at them at face value. In this franchise, males just do have a higher rate of survival and seemingly importance. The numbers, they don't lie. But if we are taking this franchise to court, the role of woman in this franchise is worth analyzing. Like, what are they doing in these movies and how are they portrayed? Again, in an overall sense, what is the vibe for the average woman in a Friday the 13th film? And I want to get into specific examples, but first let's just talk about woman as a whole. After a close look, female characters in the franchise are often portrayed as vulnerable and wholly dependent on men. And again, like, a point can be made that it does reinforce these harmful stereotypes towards women. Women aren't strong, women aren't cunning, they're not smart enough to overcome these situations. That's, by the numbers, that's what these films are telling us. And here's the thing about entertainment, it's really good at hiding shit because it's entertaining. Hey, look over here while I'm telling you this thing over here. That shit happens, man. So what's the deal? Are they just underwritten? Sometimes you just can't flesh out every asshole character that you put in front of a camera. And that's not a male or female or in between or whatever you identify thing as. That's just a writing thing, regardless of what's in between your legs. But what about the more important women in the franchise? Quickly, let's go over who the main women of the franchise even are and how they are portrayed, because it's not just Tommy Jarvis, though he does often get like the fucking torch for who carries this franchise as the final boy, girl, what have you. So obviously, and firstly, we have Pamela Voorhees, who feels like a bit of a bias in this whole thing. Like, I feel like she shouldn't even be considered for what I'm trying to do with this video. Though, there's a whole other video about like the values that she instilled in Jason. Like, he picked that up somewhere, and we don't know who fucking Father Voorhees is and shit. So there is that element, maybe, fucking, is Pamela Voorhees a misogynist? Now we have Alice Hardy. Now, Alice is depicted as an intelligent and determined girl, using her wits to outsmart Pamela and fight for her survival. She showcases moments of strength and courage, particularly in the film's climactic sequence when she engages in hand-to-hand combat with Pamela. However, her strength lies more in her ability to endure and adapt to terrifying situations. And honestly, the rest of the women that I'm going to talk about here border that same sensibility. In part 2, we have Jenny Field, a psychology student who's analyzing Jason. Then we have Chris Higgins in part 3, who has a traumatic history with Jason, ultimately confronting and beating him. In the final chapter, we get Trish Jarvis, who's depicted as a protector to little Tommy Jarvis. Tina Shepard in New Blood possesses telekinetic abilities. Rennie Wickham, Rowan LaFontaine, Laurie Campbell. These are just a few examples of important female characters who have graced the Friday the 13th franchise. And while yes, they all have like different things that they bring to the table, overall there isn't a huge diversity to the narrative that they write these women in. So of course, if you write one strong character and then mimic them throughout the entire thing, they're all gonna come off as capable. So that's a point in the right direction, right? Well, it would be if literally any of these protagonists survived a Friday the 13th film. That would honestly dispute some of the anti-woman heretic that is surrounding the franchise. And yes, while some are like dream sequel, like, did she die in the canoe? I thought that was a dream. The franchise carries on as if all of these deaths that we see are canon. I guess except for Chris Higgins. She's the only one that they left like ambiguous enough to be like, well, she could be alive. Now let's look at the male protagonists that fucking survive. It's just not equal. Now, I'm not gonna get into the term final girl, because there are many documentaries that go over it and probably do a way better job than I ever could. But to at the very least touch on it, I use the term final girl all the time, but I also am aware of the fact that that term, there's a fucking implication that the final girl is the exception and not the rule. Again, I don't make that up. That is what it is. And if it feels like this video is like pointing at just men get murdered too, refer to the numbers again with this franchise. Of course, in the genre, we have strong women who are brave and they become legends. But when zeroing in on Friday, while yes, maybe the term can be seen as problematic, there's a bigger issue that in Friday, there's none. And I don't want to shit on the series. And I also don't want you to think that I'm sitting here saying that Friday the 13th is anti-feminist or anti-female. In my heart of hearts, I don't believe that these movies set out to promote such an anti-female message. I just happen to think that the subliminal message going on wasn't aware of the blatant disregard for women. And maybe the argument here is Friday the 13th chauvinistic, because it's not the only one with chauvinistic elements, but maybe because the film achieves such huge success that maybe they should be held to a higher standard. And of course, that's going to give way to conversations about what is and isn't anti-female. And if something is going to be that successful, there is a responsibility to figure out what you're saying and allow it to be viewed with stronger scrutiny. It comes with the territory of making something a household name. And that's where I think a lot of tightening up happened with 2009's Friday the 13th. And a lot of people don't seem to give that film the penance for what it actually deserves. Like, don't get me wrong, it was the most brutal Jason that we ever got, and we love that. But to me, there are multiple instances where females are portrayed as strong and super independent in a way that the previous films kind of failed to show. And for the first time in a Friday the 13th film, male characters didn't exhibit that same empowerment. So where does that leave us? With the new Crystal Lake show fast approaching, perhaps we'll see a change that we need to see in this series, that it desperately needs to survive in today's climate. And with that change, maybe it can start to shed some of these rumors surrounding this franchise's depiction of women. Now, to be clear, this is not me saying that I feel like we need a female-centric storyline. Sorry, ladies and others, I am a male and I want a story that's gonna appeal to me as well. I don't think what the franchise needs is a blatant gender focus or related plot, but maybe figuring out a cool way to shine a light and poke at it would be enough to say, hey, we know, we're working on it, and we want to be better. But what do you think? Do you think that Friday the 13th is redeemable? And what do you think about these numbers when it comes to how it's treated men versus how it's treated women? Whatever you think, let me know down in the comments below. If you dig what I've been doing on the channel, check out my Patreon. I have a bunch of early access to really cool and interesting videos. I cover things over there that I never cover over here, like talking about the simps of the horror community, or what I thought about Gremlin's Secrets of the Mogwai. But it's so much more than that. There's podcasts, there's music, there's movies, and for the price of sharing a coffee with your boy, even though I'm more of a tea drinker, you can help keep this channel going. But times are rough, and I know that not everyone can provide in that way, so please like the video and please drop a comment letting me know your thoughts. If you dug what we do here and you want to see more, subscribe. And especially make sure to check that your bell is on. I've learned recently that a large majority of people's bells were turned off recently due to like an inspection period. Like I had to talk to fucking YouTube and shit. It was a whole thing. But please check your notification bell and let me know that it's on. For everything else, I'll catch you on the next one. Peace, video creeps.
I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy. And I punch the man who says I'm not. I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy. And I punch the man who says I'm not.